The New York Jets season is over. A couple of days after they lost to the Raiders on Sunday Night Football, they had a players-only meeting where the players in the locker room came together and voiced their frustrations and grievances. But I felt like this meeting was pretty pointless because the biggest problem with the New York Jets isn't going to get solved. And that's because Robert Saleh, for some strange reason, just has this weird commitment to starting Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson is the main reason why the New York Jets locker room is frustrated because he sucks. He's probably the second worst starting quarterback in the NFL right now, not named Tommy DeVito. And you see, there's a reason why Robert Saleh and the whole entire Jets front office flew all the way from New York to California to get on their knees to beg for Aaron Rodgers to come play for them. That's because they play in the AFC conference, which is home to majority of the NFL's best quarterbacks. And if you don't have good or competent quarterback play, it's pretty hard for you to be a playoff team just relying on great defense. And let's face it, Zach Wilson at best is a okay backup. He wouldn't be a starter on the majority of teams in the NFL, and I don't even think he would cut it to be good enough to be a backup on a third of the league right now. You see, these players were frustrated with the quarterback situation last year, which was a big reason why they went out there and they traded for Aaron Rodgers. And there was a lot of hope and optimism coming into this season because of them getting Aaron Rodgers. But when he got injured 3 plays Monday night against the Buffalo Bills, all that hope and optimism pretty much evaporated. And even though the Jets found the way to win that game, there was reports coming out that said that Jets coaches lost a lot of sleep that night due to the injury to Aaron Rodgers. You see, Zach Wilson, he's holding this team back. And yeah, he's not all of the reason for why this offense sucks, but he deserves 85 to 90% of the blame. The offensive line isn't good. They don't really have any talent at receiver outside of Garrett Wilson. And then they can't run the football. Breece Hall is a great back, but the offensive line isn't good in pass protection or in opening up holes in the run lane. And plus, it doesn't help at the fact that Zach Wilson is so bad that defenses come in and they say, yeah, you're not going to beat us running the football. We're going to force you to beat us with Zach Wilson. And you want to know how Zach Wilson is a terrible quarterback? The fact that he played his best game ever against the Kansas City Chiefs and yet still find the way to fold in the closing minutes of the game and give the Chiefs the win. That's the sign that you don't have a good quarterback. You see, the New York Jets, the fact that Robert Saleh keeps throwing Zach Wilson out there and keeps telling everybody there's nobody better that we can throw out there is bullshit. Robert Saleh is either one of 3 things. Either he's naive, thinking that Zach Wilson 1 week is just all of a sudden going to figure it all out and he's going to be that quarterback that the Jets envisioned him becoming when they drafted him a couple of years ago out of BYU. Or 2, he's delusional because he thinks that Zach Wilson gives them the best chance to win as opposed to the other available quarterbacks out there or the QBs who they could have traded for, such as Joshua Dobbs. Or 3, Zach Wilson has him at gunpoint. You guys let me know what you guys think the answer is, but I'm going to go with him being naive and delusional because how can you say Zach Wilson gives you the best chance to win because he knows the playbook and it will take a while for any other quarterback you bring in to get acclimated with the system when the Minnesota Vikings traded for Joshua Dobbs at the trade deadline, and then a couple of days later, he has to come in against the Atlanta Falcons and he leads them to a win despite having to learn the playbook on the sidelines and not knowing pretty much any of his teammates' name. And they've won 2 straight games with Joshua Dobbs at the helm at quarterback. So if the Vikings can do it, why can't you do it? Because the New York Jets put all their chips in one basket on Aaron Rodgers. The reason why they hired Nathaniel Hackett was because of his relationship and bond that he had with Aaron Rodgers. You see, Aaron Rodgers came to the New York Jets, and this pretty much was the main reason why this team had hope, plus them having a great defense. And if you were like me and you believe that the Jets were good enough to make it to the playoffs because of Aaron Rodgers, it's because you overlooked the offensive line and lack of talent that they had on offense because you felt like Aaron Rodgers was good enough to overcome that. But now that you don't have Aaron Rodgers, You have Zach Wilson back there. This team isn't good enough to carry Zach Wilson on a week-to-week basis. The only way the Jets are going to beat good teams like the Dolphins or the Bills is if they get lucky enough that their defense can play out of this world in those games and force multiple turnovers like they did against the Philadelphia Eagles. You see, they're a worse version of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they got bad quarterback play and a bad offensive coordinator, but the difference between them and the Jets is that at times this offense can give you 20 points. And there's enough talent around Kenny Pickett where this offense can have success in certain moments during the game. Meanwhile, you look at the New York Jets, looking for this offense to score 17 points in the game is like cutting your teeth. You see, Robert Saleh, I like him a lot. He's a great motivator. He's obviously a fantastic defensive mind because his defenses have been really good. But for some reason, his inability to just give up and move on from Zach Wilson is hurting this team and it's causing all the frustration that they're dealing with in the locker room. And I'm really surprised that this whole entire team just hasn't flipped on Robert Saleh when we know what the main reason is for the New York Jets coming up short. It's the same reason why they didn't make it to the playoffs last year. And even when Aaron Rodgers is ready to come back, I mean, their season is pretty much going to be over before he's even healthy enough to return at quarterback. The only reason Aaron Rodgers probably will be able to play this year, despite the Jets not being in playoff contention, is to give the Jets hope and optimism and a little momentum going into next season. That's all about it. Because there's no way I see them beating either the Bills, Dolphins, or even the Falcons when their offense is this bad. It's hard to win in today's NFL with bad quarterback play. The only way you can win with a terrible quarterback like Zach Wilson is if you just have an all-around great roster around him. The Jets have a great defense, but they don't have a great offensive line. They can't run the football, and outside of Garrett Wilson, who Zach Wilson constantly overthrows, even when he's open, I mean, there's not too much for him to work with. You see, this player meeting, to me, was pointless. Because the biggest problem with the Jets isn't going to change because Robert Saleh refuses to move on from this dude. For some reason, Robert Saleh just really wants to give Zach Wilson more time to prove himself. And how much more time does this dude truly deserve? He hasn't proven anything. His best performance against Kansas City, they still lost. He still folded in the closing moments of the game. You see, your franchise quarterback should elevate in big moments, like CJ Stroud. Zach Wilson in big moments, you're hoping that he just doesn't F it up for you. And you can't win football that way consistently. On a week-to-week basis, you need a consistent all-around team performance. You got to be able to play complementary football, and the Jets don't do that. The Jets rely on special teams and great defense to win, and that's about it. That's not a winning formula. You're not going to be able to beat the Bills and the Dolphins with that kind of recipe, and you're damn sure not going to be able to stay afloat in the playoff race when teams like the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals are also on the outside looking into things. When you look at all of the teams in the AFC that are currently in the playoff picture right now, they all have good quarterback play. The Jets don't have that. You see, the Steelers, some way, somehow, like, they're able to stay afloat in the playoff chase. But Kenny Pickett is way more serviceable than Zach Wilson. And even then, Deshaun Watson hasn't been great prior to his injury, but he's way better than Zach Wilson. So the Steelers and Browns probably are the only two teams in the playoff picture that are finding ways to win despite not having great quarterback play. But you got to take into account that their roster is good enough to help their quarterbacks out. And now that Deshaun Watson's gone, the Browns season may be all but over, but they still got a chance because they got a great defense and they still got a all-around good team. So when you got an all-around good team, you can find ways to overcome bad quarterback play. But you can't overcome bad quarterback play with not a lot of talent to work with and a bad offensive line. And even if Aaron Rodgers is able to come back and this team is somehow able to stay in contention to make it to the playoffs, there's no guarantee that they're even going to be able to get in. At best, they'll be an 8-9 win team. To at least be able to be eligible for the playoffs this year, I believe you got to at least have 10 wins or more. There's a possibility that we may see a team that wins 11 games not even make it into the playoffs with how competitive the AFC has been this year. But, you know, like, It goes back to my earlier point. There was a lot banking on Aaron Rodgers going into this season. And the fact that he's not here and he's not healthy, this team is unraveling. And Zach Wilson getting the nod every single week when he obviously isn't it, it's an indictment on Robert Saleh. Because in life, you got to know when to move on from things that just isn't working. And his reluctancy to move on from Zach Wilson, just to throw his hands up and say, you know what, we whiffed on Zach Wilson, is a large reason why this locker room is having all this frustration. It's not that hard to go out there and get a Joshua Dobbs caliber quarterback out there. Instead of trying to put the best guy on the field to give you the best opportunity to win, you're politicking. You're still throwing Zach Wilson out there because you still want him to live up to the potential that you saw in him when you drafted him. But he obviously doesn't have that much potential. His potential at best is being a good backup. Right now, he's a below average at best backup. And although he has been slightly better this season than what he's been in past years, he still is terrible. Like, Zach Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett deserve to be thrown out of the facilities, left on the corner of the road for the dumpster people to come pick them up. Because they're awful. They're trash. Even Nathaniel Hackett, like, his play calling doesn't make Zach Wilson any better. This was an offense tailor-made for Aaron Rodgers. They gave Aaron Rodgers a wish list, for crying out loud, to make it even more appealing for him to want to come to New York. So you let Aaron Rodgers handpick the players that he wanted to play with and get coached by an offensive coordinator who he loves, but he's not there, so what you expect? The New York Jets, it doesn't matter if Aaron Rodgers gets healthy and he's able to come back this season. Their season is going to be over way before then, because Zach Wilson is the main reason why this team is in the situation that they're in. Yeah, if he had a better offensive line, some more talent, he could be slightly better, but even then, they still wouldn't be all that good.